Assalamu alaikum, good evening, welcome to INX Prime, to the special broadcast here on DSTV channel 345. My name is Mohammad and I'm your host for this evening's special. So the Banking Association of South Africa will be hosting the Islamic Banking Conference at the Qurtuba Convention Centre. And joining me this evening are the CEOs and heads of a number of Islamic and Sharia compliant banks in South Africa to talk more about this very, very important conference. So I'm delighted to be joined by Shaheen Suliman, the head of Islamic banking at ABSA, Mr. Shabir Chohan from the chief executive at Al Barakah, Amman Muhammad, the CEO of FNB Islamic Banking, from HBZ, Mohammad Mohsin Ahmed, the Assistant Vice President, Sirat and Islamic Banking, and from Standard Bank, the Head of Sharia Banking, Ameen Hassan. Gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to INX Prime. So we know the conference takes place tomorrow. It's really important to have these conferences, and also so important to see this collaboration happening with all the major banks in South Africa, especially amongst the Islamic or Sharia compliant bank. I want to start with you, Ameen. What sets Sharia compliant banking apart from conventional banking, especially in a South African context?
Mohammed, Jazakallah for that. I think in its simplest form, if we use economic, we know interest is forbidden in terms of the Sharia. We hear this all the time. But in economic terms, I think a nice way of explaining it is conventional economics sees money as an asset. So we give out money and we charge for the use of money. Sharia doesn't see money as an asset. It sees it as a medium of exchange and a unit of account, but not a store of value. And so if you look at all of the Sharia contracts, it ensures that there is an asset in the transaction. So the transactions are either asset-based or asset-backed. So this fulfills the Sharia elements or the quantitative elements of the Sharia, that it's not an interest-based contract. There's a tangible asset in the transaction. And then there's the qualitative side of it. We ensure that money within the system doesn't get placed within impermissible or sin industries. Alcohol, pornography, tobacco, etc. All of these industries are excluded. So you've got this qualitative element, which ensures the sectoral exclusions. And then you've got the quantitative side, which ensures that interest is not part of the transaction. I think those are the two main elements of it. Obviously, there's so much more that we can discuss, but for brevity, we'd maybe just leave it there as a start to the conversation.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a very important, there's so much more than just it being interest-free banking. I want to bring Mr. Amman Muhammad in. How has the demand for Sharia-compliant banking in South Africa evolved over the last few years? We know it started off a few years ago, and we had maybe Islamic banks, but now we're seeing the big banks, the major banks, offering this product. How has it evolved over the years?
Mohammed, the evolution has been significant. Sitting next to me, Shabir, with Al Barakah Bank, celebrating nearly more than 35 years in the industry. This year, FNB celebrates nearly 20 years in the industry, and then so on with my other colleagues. I think of significance, I'll touch on a few highlights within the evolution of this particular industry. So in 2010, when then Minister of Finance Trevor Manuel got back from an AU conference, and he made the bold statement that South Africa is the gateway to finance in Africa, he was stopped in his tracks because one of the AU ministers mentioned to him that if you do not have an advanced Islamic finance structure within your country, you can't claim to be the gateway to finance in Africa. So on a continent that houses nearly 1 billion people, 500 million people are adherents of the Islamic faith. It was at that point that Minister Trevor Manuel then took serious for the first time the need for legislative changes to come through within this Islamic banking space. And this, in effect, happened in 2010, where for the first time, we were formally recognized in a legislative space through the South African National Tax Act, through Section 24J of the Direct Tax Act and 8A of the VAT Act, where Islamic products were now for the first time known and recognized by their Arabic structure in terms of what they were. This was quite important in actually leveling the playing field. Quickly thereafter, in 2014, we saw the issuance of the first US dollar sukuk that was issued by a non-Muslim country, making South Africa the second ever country, non-Muslim country, to issue sukuk. At the time, it was a 500 million US dollar sukuk that was at the lowest dollar funding that the South African sovereign had ever had at 3.98%. And the beauty of this, in short, was that we used an Islamic structure to benefit all of the people of South Africa with the $500 million that had come through. Fast forwarding then, just touching on a few of the points here, just last year, November 2023, we saw the first ever local currency rand-denominated sukuk being issued. And this was particularly significant for all of the Islamic financial institutions where we needed a local currency sukuk, which is then used either from a capital markets perspective, a product development structure. And what this then allows us to be, and coming to your point, is that it levels a playing field. It allows us to effectively compete against conventional banking structures. And what we've seen over the last couple of years is the new entrance of banks coming into Islamic banking. For example, Nedbank being the last of the big four, now joining Islamic banking as well. And obviously the news that there could be foreign entrants that are coming into the market. I think almost on a very frequent basis, we hear of new Islamic asset management funds coming through that are listed on the JSE. Takaful is a big topic. We hear of short-term Islamic insurance and now also Islamic life insurance in the family Takaful coming through. And I think what is of most importance is that all of us sitting on the stage today have experienced double-digit growth in our respective balance sheets and our customer numbers, which I think is quite significant.
Thanks so much for that overview, Amman. I want to move now to Mr. Shaheen Suliman, the head of Islamic Banking at ABSA. Shaheen, Amman has given us, as well as Ameen from Standard Bank has given us quite a nice overview of Sharia banking. But as a customer, Mohammad Chinara sitting here, can Islamic or Sharia compliant banking actually provide a full service across the board for myself as a client?
So thanks a lot, Mohammed. I think maybe just to end off where Amman, or rather to start off where Amman ended, he spoke about double-digit growth within our respective banks. And I think that's as a result of the product offerings. How do we approach it? We typically approach it by saying, Mohammed, as an example, as an individual, how do we solve for your banking needs? Then Mohammed's family, Mohammed's business, Mohammed from a fiduciary perspective, a trust, or whatever the case may be. So we look at it holistically to understand what are your needs, what are your requirements from a banking partner. We then would make sure that each of the products that we roll out cater for your financial needs. So in today's day and age, if we look at everyone on stage here, we can say that we have a full continuum of banking product. If I start off on the deposit side, we have solutions for you to be able to transact on a daily basis. When you put your card into a machine, something happens, it works. And you know that that's done in a Sharia compliant manner. Similarly, when it comes to investments, how do we generate a return for you so that you can save on a regular basis in a Sharia compliant manner? And then when we look at your financing requirements, how do we enable you either to grow your business, either to achieve your ambition of purchasing a vehicle or whatever the case may be in a Sharia compliant manner. So we have a comprehensive offering within the big banks that is Sharia compliant, that goes through the scrutiny of our Sharia supervisory and advisory boards to make sure that we cater for the needs of the customer within the confines of Sharia.
Thanks so much for that, Shaheen. I want to bring Mr. Shabir Chohan in now, from the CEO of Al Barakah. As Amman mentioned a few minutes ago, South Africa recently celebrated the inaugural government sukuk. Firstly, for the benefit of our viewers, what is a sukuk and how significant is this milestone in the Islamic finance industry?
Mohammed, thanks. I think a sukuk is basically an Islamic bond. In the conventional sense, you have a bond. Because of the Sharia compliance nature of the product, it's called a sukuk. So for me, it's a significant milestone. I think Amman has covered the background to it, how it got established and everything else. But just some background to this, for 35 years since Islamic banking was in the country, one of the missing components was to ensure that the amounts that were placed with the Treasury authorities or the Reserve Bank was generating Sharia compliant returns. So for 35 years, that was not possible. In terms of the Banks Act, a bank must go and deposit 5% of its liabilities in the Reserve Bank. So effectively you're collecting interest, you pay the tax on it and donate that money to charity as such. So come 35 years later, in 2023, when the sovereign sukuk was issued, it changed the landscape significantly. It's actually completed the whole structuring of Islamic banking in the country. So for the first time, the amounts that were required from a regulation point of view to be deposited at the Reserve Bank generated Sharia compliant income. And it's not just the banks that will be benefiting from this, but it's also the customers, asset managers, and now we're also finding major clients also from a diversification point of view investing directly in this sovereign sukuk. So we waited for a long time. This sukuk was meant to have been rolled out in 2020. In fact, we've seen all the documentation just before COVID, and COVID came and put a stop to that. And 3 years later or 4 years later, we managed to roll out. So I think why it's so significant also is that you're finding I was in discussions with a senior government official, and they heard about the sukuk and they're saying, well, why can't we use the sukuk for other aspects? For example, there's a problem with water reticulation, water services. Why can't we use a sukuk structure to fund some of those infrastructure that's required? And for me, the opportunity that's created by the sovereign sukuk is going to be beneficial to the whole industry, and I think also for investors where they have surplus funds to invest on this. So we really pleased with it, and as I indicated, it's a significant milestone for the country.
Amazing to think that it's a Sharia compliant bond in a majority non-Muslim countries. I think hats off to our government, number one, and also to the banks for agreeing to go ahead with this. My next question will be for Mr. Mohammad Mohsin Ahmed, the Assistant Vice President, Islamic Banking at HBZ. How can we use customer service to improve the overall image of Islamic banking? We don't want it to see as something that's substandard or not the best that you're going to be getting at a bank, at your major banks or other services that the banks offer. So how can customer service improve?
Thank you, Mohammed, for having me today. Your question is very important because the Islamic banking is an ethical banking, and we have to provide the services to the customer in an ethical way. Then we should have increased our respectable service we have to provide the customer. In that way, it should be Sharia compliant and shouldn't be out from the boundary of the Sharia principles. In that way, how we can do, supposed to be the trade finance, how we can do trade finance in Sharia compliant way. In this way, we have a team with the Sharia advisors. They can check our product, and after that, when they approve the product, then we can offer to the customer. And we offer to the customer in that way it shouldn't be any non-Sharia component in this product. So that's the main crux of the Sharia banking which we are providing to the customer.
It's so important. My next question is to Mr. Amman Muhammad. We know it's called Islamic banking or Sharia banking. Mm-hmm. Is this available to everybody, or is it just targeted to the Muslim market? We know a lot of people, especially in South Africa now, speaking to people on the street, speaking to businesses, they're looking for interest-free banking. So is Islamic banking, Sharia compliant banking, available to anyone, or is it just for the Muslim community?
Yeah, I love this question. I think first and foremost, probably one of the hindrances is we call it Islamic banking. We don't call it Muslim food, we call it halal food. The consumption is for everyone, not just for, otherwise only Muslims would be eating this. So what we like to define this is that it is a credible alternate to conventional banking that is available to anyone, irrespective of their religion, their race, or their creed. And I think that's very important to note. Very much like Islam was available to anyone at the time. When we look at Islamic banking on a level where we look at what it actually offers a customer, and when you look at what Islamic banking really gives to customer by way of a variety of functionalities, we find that a lot of people are attracted to the Islamic banking product, but are hesitant when they hear the name Islamic banking. And I'm talking about non-Muslims. So one of the important things for us is, and also I suppose with the conference that's happening tomorrow, is that we continue to reiterate that Islamic banking is not just for Muslim people. It is for everyone to benefit from. And anyone who is interested can approach any of us and we'll be more than happy. So our customer base is also not exclusively Muslim. We also have non-Muslim people who participate in this type of banking.
My next question is to everybody on the panel. The stereotype of it being Islamic banking or Muslim banking, how do we break the stereotypes and how important is it to have these conferences to show? Let me start with you, Mr. Ameen.
Mohammed, I think globally we're starting to see a phenomenon when it comes to this particular environment. If you take West Africa as an example, Nigeria has got a population of nearly 200 million people, 100 million Muslims, 100 million non-Muslims. And the Nigerian government were very clear that we're not calling this Islamic banking. We're calling this non-interest banking. To Aman's point, as an alternative to an interest-based banking system, the nomenclature that they use in the country is non-interest banking. So I think globally, people are starting to realize and see that this isn't something for just for Muslims. And you have things that are emerging like the Global Ethical Finance Forum, where people are starting to see Islamic finance as the only institutionalized version of banking that is ethical in nature and interest-free. I think on the South African front, what we need to do as the practitioners, both within the banking and asset management and the takaful space as well, is how do we break this connotation? Aman uses a nice example of halal food. So there's work that we need to do. I think if you look at globally, Islamic finance from an institutionalized perspective is only 40 years old versus banking, which is 1,000 years old. The conventional banking as we know it. So we're still an infant globally. We still have a lot of work to do. And one of the things that we need to do as an industry is break this idea.
Mr. Chohan, your comment on the stereotypes. You are more Al Barakah Bank. It's an Islamic sounding name, a Muslim name. How do you break the stereotype?
With difficulty. I think for us, people automatically assume that the bank is only for Muslims. We get this comment over and over again. It's like, surprise, can people who are not of the Islamic faith also bank? And I think one of the issues is that we probably haven't done enough education. As Aman has mentioned, when you start using Islamic names for products, Murabaha, Musharaka, Mudaraba, Ijara, people tie that in with, it's only for Muslims. And for me, I think there must be an education process. There has to be an industry initiative on this. And perhaps the Banking Association, at one of our subcommittees, we need to take this a bit further, make people know, because it's got significant benefits. If you have a look at the way it works, I think it's got benefits, especially in some products where there's fixed profits. I think in the environment, especially in the South African environment, where people don't understand complex financial structures, I think Islamic banking to a certain extent can bring in some simplicity. But as I indicated, it needs some massive outreach. We need to go out, and one of the aspects is the Financial Sector Conduct Authority. When they do come and do reviews, the one question is, how are you reaching out to the total population, not just the traditional market that you have? And I think that's a question that's being raised all the time. But as I indicated, there's much more work to be done. It's not going to be done very easily, but with the support of the industry and the industry players as well as government, I do believe that we can change it over the long term.
Mr. Suliman, from your side, you in one of the major big four banks and you offering the Islamic banking. Do you find that the support from head office or from the bank itself to make sure Islamic banking works and the stereotypes are broken, are you getting the assistance, and what more can be done?
So Mohammed, most definitely, and I think it's important maybe just to clarify. So we operate as what we refer to as an Islamic banking window, which means an Islamic banking operation within a conventional bank. And the benefit we have of something like that is that we are able to leverage of the infrastructure of the bank. So from a banking perspective, obviously, and I think as Amman mentioned upfront, a lot of the banks are starting to get involved in Islamic banking because of the demand from the customer base. Now you asked, how do we break the stereotype? I think there's a few things that we're probably doing individually and collectively as well. So the first thing that pops to mind when I speak about infrastructure is that we train our frontline staff that are not necessarily Muslim. Now, if you're able to train a frontline staff where you're going to a branch in whatever remote location and they can speak to you about Islamic banking, it gives a diverse customer confidence that if this outwardly looking non-Muslim person knows and speaks about Islamic banking, it's not exclusive for Muslims or people that look a certain way. The second thing, though, is Shabir speaks about outreach programs. So we've been very proactive in ensuring that we educate at large what Islamic banking is about. So often on media platforms that may not necessarily be consumed by Muslims, we go onto those platforms to make sure that we speak about some of the principles of Islamic banking, Islamic finance. And what we try and portray there is mainly the attributes of the product. So what makes it appealing to take a specific product if I'm not a non-Muslim? Yes, we may be confined currently in terms of calling it Islamic banking, because obviously we need to first and foremost appeal to the Muslims within South Africa to take up Islamic banking. But then at the same point in time, how do we also appeal to the non-Muslims is by making sure that through the outreach programs where we educate the masses in terms of what Islamic banking principles are, by training our frontline staff that are non-Muslim so that they can have those conversations with non-Muslim customers as well, and then speak about product attributes in terms of what makes this one product more appealing than maybe the conventional counterpart.
We are seeing a big shift, and as all four gentlemen have already mentioned, and we are seeing this, as you mentioned, it's difficult for the stereotypes to be broken. My last comment on this topic will be to Mr. Mohsin Ahmed. We know HBZ has foreign interest as well. How do you bring that into South Africa to make sure that more South Africans know about Islamic banking, also using your foreign experience, bringing Islamic banking into South Africa?
Thank you, Mohammed. Mohammed, first let me clear one thing to you. Right now in Islamic banking, offering worldwide is more than 120 places. And 1,800 institutions are offering Islamic finance. And the total asset base is a $4.5 trillion, according to Islamic Finance Institutions 2023 report. Now, being of HBZ Bank is an international bank, we are in 11 countries. Currently, we are offering 5 different countries like Pakistan. We are the number 1 in Pakistan Islamic finance. In this way, people, they are promoting, they are demanding Islamic banking because they're looking, this is the ethical, number 1, to support the real economy, because the conventional banking is not supposed the real economy, they're supposing to the land-based economic. This is a balloon, and one day, you know, as the recession came in 2008, is blast that balloon, and after that people, they suppress, and now again they're supporting Islamic banking. Why? Because they're supporting, because this is the support the real economy, justifying to the economic system, whatever that currently is running as a capitalism system. That's the reason HBZ Bank also is a trade finance bank. They support trades. In that way, we want to bring Islamic banking in South Africa to introduce Islamic banking and to improve the economic system of the South Africa Bank.
I think it's so important. We know how Islamic banking in South Africa has evolved and improved and grown so far in the last maybe 35 years with Al Barakah. But Sir Chohan, what do you believe is the next milestone for this industry, especially from a South African context?
I think there's going to be quite a lot, but I just want to talk about maybe takaful, which is Islamic insurance. The consumer has got options now to go and consume Islamic products, buy a house, buy a car, for his business, working capital, etc. The Islamic insurance, takaful, is not yet well developed. It is in its embryonic stage. If you have a look at the number of people still consuming conventional insurance, because there's limited choices. There is one organization that's marketing and developing Islamic insurance products. But for me, I can see that as a major, major growth area. And I can see that contributing significantly to completing the whole circle on people becoming more or consuming more Islamic products. So it's not just going to be on the short-term takaful, but it'll also be on the life takaful, because the same principles apply. Yes, there's a lot of discussions about the Sharia compliance of it. Overseas, they've done a lot of work on it. It's probably new to South Africa. Just like how when Islamic banking started off in South Africa, there were a lot of criticisms. And I think with takaful also you're going to get that. But I'm expecting in the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be a significant amount of growth in the takaful industry in the country.
I think it's, we just think of the banking and going to a bank and doing a transaction. So Mohammed, from your point of view, I think I'm going to pose the same question to everybody on the panel. What do you think is the next major milestone from your point of view?
So I believe that there's still many gaps and long runways in existing areas that we've kicked off in our initial Islamic banking offerings. And I think with Shabir's celebrating 35 years, with us 20 years, and like the other banks, we believe that the opportunity to further enhance and develop our product offering, our services, there's still many opportunities for this. And when you really look at our target audience being the Muslim customer, and we spoke at length about the non-Muslim customer, if you really look at where this community that we serve comes from, they are highly economically active, they are traders in nature, and if you look at how the evolution of the shopkeeper has now become the manufacturer, the wholesaler, we see that continuing to grow and evolve. And whether it's family businesses or new businesses, the opportunity for growth in Islamic banking within the commercial sector has got a long runway, in my opinion. Mohsin spoke about trade finance. There are very many different areas along the lines of working capital finance. We didn't even touch on the elements of commercial property finance, personal property finance. But within that commercial sphere, people wanting to grow their businesses, people wanting to expand, looking cross-border, importing, exporting, to associate and align an Islamic structure to go with that is what many of our businessmen are looking at. And while a lot of South Africans during the last tumultuous period we saw left the country, we found, and I'm sure my colleagues will agree with me, that Muslim businessmen are here to stay. They support SA Inc., and they're looking to grow businesses and looking to establish themselves further. So from my perspective, the next big thing, which is already under our noses, is to further enhance that whole commercial sector.
So Ameen Hassan, from your point of view, what do you think would be, I think both Mr. Chohan and Mr. Mohammed have given really important points. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, Mohammed, I think as an industry, we're sitting here today, and one of our primary objectives is to try and grow the industry as a collective. So I think there's different elements. Shabir and Amman spoke on two elements. I think for me, something that's personally a passion of mine, which I think is also underdeveloped, is what we would broadly categorize as fiduciary services. The Sharia, over and above the prohibition of interest, we have what we call the maqasid al-Sharia, the objectives of the Sharia. And one of the objectives of the Sharia is hifdhul mal, is the protection of your wealth. So how do we ensure that, Amman spoke about the significant strides that our community has made in building businesses and the wealth generation. How do we work in preserving that wealth in a Sharia compliant way? Because we know from a South African law perspective, we don't have coverage in terms of our Islamic law of inheritance. The Sharia, we don't have what's known as the freedom of testation. We've got predetermined distribution methodologies by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And many of our community members actually die without a will. And we hear stories about the heirs fighting and people fighting over inheritance, etc. And you eradicate this by actually having a proper fiduciary plan in place. And many people live their entire life fulfilling all of the obligations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they die without fulfilling the Islamic law of inheritance. So I think that's one area that I think we as an industry also need to work towards, is building out the education piece on the complexity of having your law of inheritance fulfilled in a Sharia compliant way within a South African context, putting proper estate planning tools in place, utilizing the structures, the juristic entity structures available with us to preserve your wealth for your generations to come, inshallah.
Inshallah, Ameen. Mr. Suliman, from your point of view, do you think there's be further milestones in the Islamic banking sector?
So Mohammed, most definitely, and I concur with my colleagues. So Amman spoke about what's required from a business perspective. Shabir spoke about the insurance or the takaful industry. I think Ameen touched on a very important point as well in terms of fiduciary needs and wealth preservation. And maybe just along similar lines of wealth preservation, and to the first point I touched on is, as an individual, what are our needs from an Islamic finance perspective, right? So in line with wealth preservation, how do we as Islamic banks cater for your international banking needs as well in a Sharia compliant manner? So it's a global world that we're living in now. So often, whilst we only focus on South Africa, there's needs to make sure that you are able to invest offshore, you're able to get some sort of exposure in a different currency, hedge against the rand. What Sharia compliant products are available to you as an individual, available to you as a business? But I think along a similar line is, when we look at the concept of instant gratification, which we chatted about earlier as well, is that how do we as Islamic banks make sure that we utilize technology for you to be able to fulfill your banking or your financial services needs immediately? Something simple like ordering a car, and Mohammed, you spoke about going into a branch. Those are things of the past, and if we as Islamic banks can't cater for those basic needs as an individual, then we'd be failing our customer base. So there's still a lot of room in terms of new products that need to come out from a personal banking space, from a wealth banking space as well, and also just to make it more easy and convenient for Islamic customers to be able to transact.
I think it's very important, just the ease of access for not only Islamic, for all customers to transact, especially in a country like South Africa, where access to malls and access to branches is so hard for so many people, and making it easier and just getting a card delivered to your home wherever you are. I think that's very important, a very important point you've made there. Finally, Mr. Ahmed, what do you think would be a milestone for South Africa in the sector?
Look, thank you, Mohammed. The main question is how we can improve our services, especially in the trade finance and the forex services. Because in South Africa, the dollar rate is very volatile. And customer or the trader, they are worried about that. Today they can buy anything, that tomorrow the dollar rate will go up. In this way, if we can bring Sharia compliant foreign exchange services, so it can help to the customer in the trade business. As we mentioned earlier, the HBZ Bank is a main target is a trade business. In the trade business, that's the reason we should bring more businesses, more product like salam for the currency. Then people, they hedge the currency rate. So this is the main thing as we in this forum, colleague already discussed that one. We have to bring more product and should cover all the aspects, whatever the hedging of the currency, to bring to improve the trade business, Sharia compliant trade business, to improve our efficiency of the banking, Islamic banking efficiency.
Thank you so much for that. We're almost at the end of this evening's, I think it's a really, really interesting chat with all the bankers. I just want to get final thoughts from everybody on the panel. We know tomorrow marks the 5th annual Islamic Banking Conference, and we see a collaboration between the banks. I think it's so important to see the banks working together through the Banking Association of South Africa, and also bringing Islamic banking to the forefront, and for people to understand and know what's going on with Islamic banking. And I think we mentioned a few times how to break the stereotypes. But I'm going to start with you, Mr. Mohammed. How do we, what are your final thoughts, and what can we expect now from this conference?
So first and foremost, you can't educate if you don't have awareness. Programs like the Islamic Banking Conference is intended to increase the reach of this awareness of this unique banking that we offer, like I said, a credible alternate to conventional banking. Secondly, we also aim to highlight the role of the key internal and external stakeholders that actually make this industry work. You're seeing a fantastic collection of the key internal stakeholders, the practitioners of Islamic banking sitting here, but then also lawyers, accountants, auditors, marketing. I mean, there's a whole lot of things that actually make this industry work for us. Tomorrow, I like to think that it's a celebration of how we harmoniously come together to make all of this work. And the end goal, which I'm sure all of my fellow colleagues here will agree with, is to really benefit the customer who opts to use an Islamic banking model.
Mr. Chohan, your final thoughts?
Super excited. I think being the 5th conference, we want to make sure the awareness, especially with the regulatory authorities. You know, we're living in a great country. The South African government, as was mentioned earlier, they've come across and they changed legislation. They've made things possible. They want to make sure that the playing fields are leveled. In terms of the constitution, everyone needs to be treated fairly as such. And for me, the changes that they've made, they must be congratulated on that. And we want to see them playing an even bigger role, to be aware of some of the challenges. And we currently, the Islamic banking industry is very small in the country. But I do believe that it's got a lot of potential. It's got significant potential for growing. And in that regard, this is our small step to make people aware of it and to go on that path to have a significant Islamic banking industry in the country.
Very important. Mr. Suliman, your final thoughts?
So, Mohammed, I like the word Amman used, celebration, and I think it's something that maybe appeals in the sense that we come together as a collective on a day to grow the Islamic banking industry, right? And our intention and objective of the session tomorrow is, yes, whilst we represent our individual banks, but rather to be there as a platform to grow the Islamic banking industry as a whole. There's quite a few interesting topics that we discuss, and with a focus on educating, like my colleagues have mentioned as well, but also just coming up with new ideas. So whilst we have the opportunity to network with each other, to understand what the needs are, and to learn from each other in terms of how can we as a collective make sure that when we go back to our respective organizations, there's some solutions that we can maybe implement. Maybe there's things that we're struggling with. As a collective, how do we grow this industry? And I think that for me is the main takeaway from tomorrow's session.
Mr. Hassan, your last final thoughts?
Mohammed, my colleagues spoke on quite a few of the elements. I think for me, it's also an opportunity for us to reflect on two things. One, sometimes we get so busy in our day-to-day in managing the business, in trying to run the business, that we actually forget as an industry how much progress we've made. So I think for me, it's one reflection point that we use is we pause at this event and we actually take stock of the journey that we've been through and celebrate the progress that we've made. But the second is, as you look backwards, it's also for you to look forwards and ensure that the true north that we set as an industry, we set a pathway to achieve that. So it's also an opportunity for us to take stock of whether we are still on the same pathway or have we deviated, and ensure that we calibrate our journeys accordingly to ensure that we still fulfill our true north and our objectives.
Most definitely. And finally, Mr. Ahmed, your final thoughts?
Yeah, tomorrow is a very, very important conference, 5th Banking Association conference. In that conference, we should think about that all the professionals, stakeholders, all the Sharia scholars, they should sit together and bring the innovative product to help to the society, to help to the community. If we can bring more product, if we can innovative product, and what are the challenges we are facing, we should address that, and then we can grow our Islamic banking in South Africa.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time this evening. I think the future of Islamic banking in South Africa and I think throughout the world is very positive, and long may it continue, and all the best with the conference and all the best with the different banks moving forward. To our viewers out there, we hope you enjoyed today's program. I think it was such an important topic that we discussed, so many different topics that were discussed. And as I mentioned, the future looks very bright. But until we meet again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh and good evening.